Talia Marsh had flour on her wrists and butter under her fingernails when the black sedan pulled through the gates of the Ishida estate for the first time, though she did not know yet that the man stepping out of it would learn her name before he learned anything else about her. She had been hired 3 days earlier through an agency that specialized in placing private chefs with clients who valued discretion above almost everything, and the only instructions she had been given were simple. Cook well. Ask no questions. Stay out of rooms she was not invited into. She had accepted the position because the pay was absurd and because she was tired, bone tired, of catering weddings for people who complained about the price of good butter, and she told herself that a private house in the hills outside Kyoto could not be so different from any other kitchen she had ever commanded. She was wrong within the first hour. The kitchen itself was a cathedral of steel and stone, better equipped than any restaurant she had worked in, and she moved through it that first morning with the quiet reverence of a woman meeting an old friend she had not expected to see again. Copper pots hung in a row above the island, unscratched, as though no one had used them properly in years. The pantry ran the length of a small room, stocked with ingredients she recognized and dozens she did not, jars labeled in careful handwriting that was not the same hand as the recipe cards tucked behind them. She spent the first hour simply touching things, learning the weight of the house's knives, the give of its cutting boards, the particular hiss of its stovetop when the gas caught. She was unpacking her own knives, laying them out on a folded cloth the way her grandmother had taught her, when the door opened without a knock and a man walked in wearing a charcoal suit that had clearly never touched a rack in a department store. He did not introduce himself. He simply stood in the doorway and looked at her the way a man looks at something unfamiliar in his own house, something he had not authorized but had not yet decided to remove. Takumi Ishida did not raise his voice, ever, and he did not raise it now. He asked her name in a tone so level it was almost gentle, and when she told him, he repeated it once, quietly, as though testing the shape of it in his mouth.
Talia.
He said it differently than the agency recruiter had, differently than anyone had said it in a long time, and she noticed that before she noticed the ink she could see peeking from beneath his shirt cuff when he reached out to touch the handle of one of her knives. She did not know yet what he was. She only knew that the air in the room had changed the moment he entered it, grown heavier, more deliberate, the way a room feels different right before a storm breaks over it. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself men who wore suits like that were simply used to being obeyed, and she had never been a woman who obeyed easily. That was the moment everything changed, though neither of them said so aloud. He left without eating anything, without commenting on the small pie she had put in the oven out of habit more than instruction, a sweet potato pie with a lattice crust she had built because her hands needed something to do while her mind adjusted to her new surroundings. She assumed he would not return until dinner. She was wrong about that too. He came back 40 minutes later, drawn by a smell he could not place, and he stood in the doorway again, silent, until she finally turned around and caught him watching her. She told him it was for the house, all of it, though she had not planned on him being the one to eat it. He asked without preamble what it was. She told him. He asked if he could have a slice. It was such an ordinary question, such an ordinary want, that it landed strangely coming from a man whose stillness suggested he rarely wanted anything he could not simply take. She cut him a slice. He ate it standing at the counter instead of at the table that had clearly been set for men like him his entire life, and something in his shoulders eased that she would spend the following weeks trying to name. He did not thank her in words. He set the empty plate in the sink himself, which she would later learn no one in that house ever did, and left without another word. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt, on its surface, almost ordinary. She learned the house the way she learned any kitchen, by its edges and habits. She learned which of the staff would speak to her freely, and which averted their eyes the moment she asked a question that strayed too close to what the house actually was. An older woman named Reiko who managed the linens told her, without being asked, that the last chef had lasted 11 days and left without collecting his final pay. Talia noted it and said nothing, filing it away the way she filed away every other detail that did not add up cleanly. The threat entered the house on the 4th night, though Talia did not understand what she was witnessing until it was already happening around her. She had stayed late to finish prepping for the following day, portioning stock into containers long after the rest of the kitchen staff had gone home, and the first sound she heard was not a gunshot but a door, slammed with a force that rattled the pans hanging above her station. Then voices, low and urgent, moving fast down the hallway that connected the kitchen to the rest of the house. She did not think. She acted, the way she always had, pulling the heavy prep table between herself and the doorway before her mind had finished deciding it was the right choice. Takumi appeared in the doorway seconds later, blood on his knuckles that was not his own, his jaw set in a way that told her more than any explanation could have. He told her to stay down. She did not stay down. She grabbed the cast iron pan from the stove because it was heavy and it was close, and because some part of her had already decided she was not going to be a woman who waited quietly to find out whether she survived the night. The man who came through the door behind him did not expect resistance from the kitchen. Talia swung before he had fully cleared the frame, and the impact staggered him long enough for Takumi to finish what he had started in the hallway. It was over in under a minute. The silence afterward was worse than the noise had been. She stood with the pan still raised, her breath loud in her own ears, and watched Takumi straighten his cuffs as though he had done nothing more than close a window against the wind. He looked at her differently after that night, though he did not say so. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has recalculated the value of. She learned, in pieces over the following week, what he was. Not from him directly, not at first, but from the careful way the staff spoke around certain words, from the men who came and went at odd hours with faces that gave nothing away, from the way the household moved like a machine built entirely around his safety. Ishida. The name meant something in Kyoto, something that made grown men lower their eyes when a car bearing the family crest passed them on the street. She should have left. She told herself this every night for a week, lying awake in the guest wing with her door locked and her mind racing through every reason a smart woman would pack a bag and disappear before dawn. She did not leave. She told herself it was the money. She told herself it was pride, the refusal to let danger chase her out of a job she had barely started. She did not let herself examine the third reason too closely, the one that had to do with the way he said her name. She called her sister that week, the only person outside the estate who still expected to hear from her regularly, and lied about most of it. She said the job was demanding but good, that the house was beautiful, that her employer kept to himself. She did not mention the blood on his knuckles or the cast iron pan she had swung with more conviction than she had ever felt doing anything else in her life. Her sister asked, the way she always did, whether Talia was eating enough and sleeping enough and taking care of herself in a city so far from home, and Talia said yes to all of it because it was easier than explaining that she had never felt more awake in her life than she had the night she stood over a stranger with a cast iron pan in her hand and did not regret a single second of it. When the call ended, she sat for a long while in the dark of the guest room, turning the conversation over, aware that she had just told the first true lie of her adult life to protect someone else from a truth she had not yet fully admitted to herself. The household staff took longer to warm to her than Takumi had, wary of a chef who had lasted longer than the one before her and who seemed, in ways none of them could quite articulate, to have earned something from their employer that none of them had. A younger member of the kitchen staff, a nervous man who handled deliveries, asked her once, in a low voice, if she understood what kind of man she was cooking for. She told him she understood exactly what kind of man she was cooking for and that she had made her peace with it before he had finished asking the question. He did not ask again. Word of her steadiness spread through the house faster than any introduction could have, and by the end of that first month, she found the staff spoke to her more freely, no longer testing her with careful half-answers, but treating her like someone who belonged, however strange the shape of that belonging still was. There was a quiet night, early in that second week, that she would return to later without meaning to. He had come into the kitchen well past midnight, unable to sleep, and instead of leaving when he saw her still there, he sat at the counter and watched her work through a batch of dough she had no real reason to be making at that hour. He did not ask her to stop. He did not fill the silence with questions the way most men in his position would have, testing her, cataloging her. He simply watched, and after a long while he asked what she was making, and she told him it was nothing, just something for her hands to do. He said he understood that better than she might think. It was the first time he had offered her anything close to a piece of himself without her having to pry it loose, and she found she did not know what to do with the gentleness of it. So she pushed a small bowl of the dough scraps toward him, fried and dusted with sugar, and he ate them standing at her elbow instead of across the counter, close enough that she could smell cedar and something like rain on stone. He found her on the terrace one night when neither of them could sleep, and for the first time he spoke about something other than the house or the food or the logistics of security. He told her, without warning, about a woman he had failed to protect years earlier, a partner in every sense of the word, taken from him because of exactly the life he led, the life he had never been able to walk away from because it had built him before he had any say in the matter. He did not ask for sympathy. He stated it the way he stated everything, flatly, as fact, and then he waited to see what she would do with it. She did not offer him comfort in the way he might have expected. She told him plainly that guilt was not the same as love, and that carrying one did not honor the other. He looked at her for a long moment after that, the kind of look that made her feel seen in a way that unsettled her more than any threat had. The following weeks blurred into a rhythm neither of them acknowledged out loud. She cooked. He watched her cook more often than any employer had reason to. Danger surfaced twice more, once in the form of a car that followed the estate's supply truck too closely for comfort, once in the form of a man found where he should not have been, near the kitchen entrance, asking questions about the new chef that had nothing to do with her cooking. Both times, Talia found herself in the middle of it, refusing the role of bystander even when Takumi ordered her to stay back. Both times, she did something that changed the shape of the danger, whether it was throwing a pot of boiling water through a window to buy seconds or memorizing a license plate that later proved useful to the men who worked for him. He began to trust her with things he trusted no one else with. Small things at first. The location of a second exit only he knew about. The fact that he did not sleep more than 4 hours most nights. Then larger things. The name of the rival faction pressing into his territory, a group led by a man named Doyle Renner, who had once done business with Takumi's late partner and now wanted what remained of that partnership for himself. Renner's people had been the ones in the hallway that first dangerous night. They would not be the last. One afternoon, when the house was unusually quiet and the staff had been given the day away, Takumi asked her to teach him something in the kitchen, an ordinary request that felt anything but. She showed him how to fold dough for dumplings, correcting the angle of his wrist with her hand over his without thinking twice about the touch until it had already happened. He was predictably precise, his folds even and controlled, and when she told him so, he said that precision was the only language he had ever been fluent in. She told him that was not true anymore, and he did not argue with her. They worked in silence after that, the two of them at the counter with flour dusting the sleeves of a suit that cost more than her first car, and it was, without either of them naming it, the closest thing to peace either of them had allowed themselves in a long time. She asked him, somewhere in the middle of that quiet hour, why a man with a house full of staff had never learned to cook a single thing for himself. He told her that his father had considered kitchens a place for servants, not sons, and that he had spent his childhood eating whatever was placed in front of him without ever once being curious about how it arrived there. She told him that struck her as a kind of poverty no amount of money could fix. He did not disagree. He asked her, in turn, why a woman with her talent had spent years catering weddings for people who complained about butter instead of opening a restaurant of her own, and she found she did not have an easy answer, only that fear had kept her small in ways she was only beginning to notice now that someone had asked. He told her, quietly, that he did not think fear suited her, and she laughed for the first time since arriving at the estate, a real laugh that surprised them both. Word of the growing tension with Renner's faction reached the kitchen in fragments over the following days, carried by the tightened schedules of the men who came and went and by the extra locks that appeared, almost overnight, on doors that had never needed them before. Talia noticed the shift the way she noticed a kitchen running low on something essential, a gap that made itself known before anyone said a word about it. She did not ask Takumi directly what was coming. She simply began keeping a second knife within reach at all times, tucked into the drawer nearest the door, and when he noticed it there one evening he said nothing, though something in his expression told her he understood exactly what it meant. The tension confession came on a night thick with rain, the kind that made the estate feel smaller, more enclosed, more theirs. She had burned her hand on the edge of a pan, and he had crossed the kitchen before she finished cursing, taking her wrist in his hand with a care that startled her more than the burn had. He did not tend the wound. He simply held her wrist a beat longer than necessary, his thumb resting against her pulse, and told her something he had clearly not intended to say aloud. He told her that he had stopped expecting to feel anything again the day he buried the last person who mattered to him, and that her presence in his kitchen had proven him wrong in a way he did not know how to forgive himself for. She told him she was not asking for forgiveness on his behalf, only honesty, and that she had noticed things about him she had not wanted to notice, the way his hands stilled when he was truly listening, the way his voice dropped half a register when he said her name at the end of a long day. Neither of them moved closer. Neither of them needed to. The room did that work for them. There was a morning, before any of that, when Takumi asked her to accompany him into the city, an errand he claimed required her opinion, though she suspected it required only her company. They walked through a market near the river. Takumi dressed down in a way she had not seen before, a simple dark coat instead of a suit, and for the length of that hour, he was almost unrecognizable as the man who commanded rooms with 3 words. He bought her nothing extravagant, only a small paper cone of roasted chestnuts from a vendor who greeted him by a name that was not Ishida, and when she asked about it he told her, with something close to a smile, that not every part of his life needed to carry his father's weight. She asked if that was true of her too, whether she existed in his life outside the weight of everything else, and he stopped walking to answer her properly, telling her that she was the only part of his life that had never once felt like weight at all. It was as close to tenderness as she had seen from him, unguarded and almost startled by its own honesty, and she carried the warmth of it back to the estate the way she carried a good stock home, careful not to spill a drop. Renner's move against her came 3 days later, and it was more personal than anything before it. A woman claiming to be a health inspector arrived at the estate gate demanding entry to the kitchen, and Talia, trained to spot a lie the way she was trained to spot under-season stock, noticed the woman's shoes were wrong for the role, and her hands too steady for someone who filled out paperwork for a living. She stalled the woman at the door, keeping her talking about nothing until the household security realized what was happening and moved in. The woman was not an inspector. She had been sent to map the kitchen's layout, to find the fastest way to reach the one person in the house Renner had correctly identified as Takumi's weakness. That was the moment Talia understood, fully and without illusion, that she was no longer simply an employee who happened to be caught in danger. She was a target because of what she meant to him, and the realization did not frighten her the way she expected. It clarified something instead. She was not going to be collateral damage in someone else's war. She was going to end it, or at least make certain she was standing when it ended. Takumi came to her that evening with an offer she had not expected. He told her she could leave, that he would arrange transport out of the country if she wanted it, a new position somewhere far from Kyoto, and everything his name carried with it. He said it without any attempt to talk her out of going, which she understood, even then, was its own kind of gift. She told him she was not interested in running from a war that had already found her once, and that she intended to be standing on the other side of it. He did not argue. He only nodded once, the way he did when a decision had been made and did not require further discussion, and something in the set of his shoulders told her he had needed to hear it more than he would ever admit. The final confrontation came on the night of a supply delivery that was never meant to be a delivery at all. Renner's men used the truck as cover, 3 of them slipping into the grounds through the service entrance Talia had walked 100 times, and she was the one who noticed the driver's face did not match the manifest photo taped to the clipboard by the gate. She said nothing to alert them. She simply excused herself to the kitchen, retrieved the boning knife she trusted most, and moved through the service hallway with the same quiet certainty she used when breaking down a whole animal, methodical, unhurried, precise. Takumi found the first man already down when he reached the hallway, Talia standing over him with a kitchen towel wrapped tight around her knuckles, and her breathing controlled in a way that told him she had done exactly what needed doing and nothing more. He did not ask if she was hurt. He asked, instead, if she was finished, and when she told him there were 2 more, his mouth moved into something that was not quite a smile but carried the same weight. They took the second man together, Takumi's precision meeting her improvisation in a way that felt, absurdly, like the first time they had worked a dinner service in sync. The third man, the one who had been sent specifically to remove any leverage Renner believed Talia represented, found her alone in the kitchen for exactly the length of time it took Takumi to realize she was not behind him. She did not wait for rescue. She used the room the way she used it every day, hot oil from the stove, a pan swung with the same efficiency she used to plate a service of 40, and by the time Takumi reached the doorway, the fight was already over, decided by a woman who had never once considered herself helpless. Renner himself arrived at the estate an hour later, foolish or desperate enough to believe the chaos had weakened Takumi's position rather than proven exactly the opposite. The confrontation between the 2 men was brief and final, conducted with the same economy Takumi brought to everything, and Talia watched from the doorway, not because she had been ordered to stay back, but because this was the one moment that belonged to him alone, the closing of a wound that had been open since before she arrived. When it was finished, the house fell into a silence that felt different from every silence before it. Not tense, not waiting, settled. The cleanup took most of the following day, men moving through the estate with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before, and Talia stayed in the kitchen because it was the one room in the house that still made sense to her. She cooked, not because anyone had asked her to, but because her hands needed something ordinary to hold on to after a night that had asked so much of them. Reiko found her there in the early afternoon and told her, without elaboration, that the staff had never seen Takumi Ishida fight for something the way he had fought that night, and that whatever Talia had done to earn that, she should not take it lightly. Talia sat with that for a long while after Reiko left, turning it over the way she turned over a recipe that had not quite worked, trying to identify the exact moment the ingredients had changed on her. She thought of the terrace, the rain, the dumplings, the way he had said her name the very first day like he was memorizing something he intended to keep. She thought of her own choice, made and remade a dozen times over the past weeks, to stay when leaving would have been so much simpler, so much safer, and she understood, sitting there with flowers still dusting the counter, that she had stopped weighing the danger against the staying a long time ago. There was only the staying now, plain and certain, the way a good stock reduces down to the thing it was always meant to be. 2 days after the confrontation, Takumi called a meeting of the men who remained loyal to him, and though Talia was not invited to sit at that table, she watched from the kitchen doorway as he laid out, in the same level voice he used for everything, exactly how the territory would be restructured, which of Renner's former holdings would be absorbed, and which would be left to smaller players who posed no threat. He was, in that moment, exactly what his name promised he would be, cold and exact and utterly in command of the room, and she found she was not afraid of that version of him, only aware of it, the way she was aware of a knife's edge without needing to test it against her skin. When the meeting ended and the men filed out, he came to find her in the kitchen still holding the weight of what he had just done, and she did not soften it for him. She simply handed him a plate and told him to eat something, because command did not excuse a man from hunger, and he took the plate from her hands like it was the only offer in the room that had ever mattered. He found her afterward in the kitchen, where she had gone because her hands needed the familiar work of something ordinary, and he watched her for a long moment before he spoke. He told her that he had spent years building walls around the parts of himself he believed could not survive being taken from him again, and that she had walked through every one of them without seeming to notice they were there. He did not call it love. He did not need to. He told her, instead, that she was the first thing in his house he had never once thought of as replaceable, and that he did not intend to spend the rest of his life pretending otherwise. Talia did not answer him with words right away. She reached for the pie she had left cooling on the counter, cut 2 slices instead of 1, and set them both at the table that had sat empty and formal for years before she arrived. He sat. She sat across from him, not beside him, because some things could not be rushed even now, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. The cost of that night stayed with the house in quiet ways, a guard lost, a debt owed to allies who had helped clean up what remained, a wariness that would take time to fade from the staff who had seen their employer nearly lose something he had never let himself claim before. In the weeks after, Takumi began coming home earlier than he had in years, trading meetings that could wait for the hour when Talia plated dinner, and though neither of them spoke of it as a change, the staff noticed, the way staff always notice the things their employers believe are invisible, and the change moved through the house like warmth through a cold room, slow at first, and then, all at once, simply the new temperature of things. But the kitchen, when morning came, smelled the same as it always had, butter and sugar and something baking low and slow, and Takumi Shida stood in the doorway the way he had that very first day, watching the woman who had walked into his house as hired help and left it as the one person he trusted with everything, including the parts of himself he had never planned on showing anyone again. She did not need him to say it outright. She had learned in the months since that first morning that some truths in that house were spoken in the way a man said a name, in the way he chose to sit across a table instead of at the head of one, in the way he came back, every single time, to a kitchen that had never once asked him to be anything other than exactly what he was. Reiko told her, weeks later, that the household had begun referring to the sweet potato pie as the thing that softened a man no one had ever seen soften, though they said it fondly, without mockery, the way staff speak of the small miracles that make a difficult house easier to live in. Talia laughed when she heard it, because it was not the pie at all, not really, only the excuse the two of them had needed to sit at the same table long enough to stop pretending they were simply employer and employee. She kept making it anyway every few weeks, not because the house asked for it but because some rituals earned their place regardless of how they began. On a quiet evening near the end of that first season, Takumi asked her, plainly, whether she intended to stay. Not as an employee. He was careful to draw the distinction, and she understood exactly what he was asking beneath the question he had actually spoken aloud. She told him she had already decided, weeks earlier, somewhere between the terrace and the rain and the night, she had stood over a stranger with a pan still raised in her hand, and that she had simply been waiting to see if he would ask instead of assume. He told her that assuming things about her had never once worked out the way he expected, and that he had learned, slowly and against every instinct that had kept him alive this long, to simply ask. She thought that might be the most honest thing he had ever said to her, more honest than the confession on the rainy night, more honest than anything spoken in the aftermath of violence. It was an ordinary question, asked plainly, by a man who had spent his whole life avoiding exactly that kind of plainness, and she answered it the same way she answered everything that mattered. She reached across the table and did not let go. If you made it this far, let me know what you thought of Talia and Takumi in the comments. Hit like if the story pulled you in, and subscribe for the next one because there are more waiting, more houses like this one, more men who did not think they had anything left to lose until someone walked into their kitchen and proved them wrong.